6:43 a.m. I'm your host Tom Kaczynski, and welcome to another episode of Sunrise in Pineland. You know the chickens getting ready to do their thing this morning as well. Hopefully they won't be too obnoxious, but we'll see. Want to thank everyone who supports the program, and sorry I wasn't available to come on yesterday, and today may not be a super long show. I'm fighting off a little bit of I don't know if it's a cold, whatever it is, but my nose, my throat, my head, all these things hurt. So have a little bit of grace for me today because yeah, I'm doing the best I can under adverse circumstances. But anyway, I hope you're all doing well. Thank you to everyone who prays for us, prays for our health, for Dana's health, for our animals, our homestead. We appreciate that. Want to thank everyone also who contributes to the program through the Venmo, CVC, PRV, PO Box 343, Eagle Lake, Maine 04739. The books on Amazon and Audible, as well as everyone who's sent crypto over the years and whatnot. We appreciate all of you. It's a small community we have, but it's one that's actually been growing, and it should continue to grow. To be honest with you, once I can kind of get my health under control, we are going to try to expand the efforts of information through this channel as much as this platform will allow. Pineland certainly isn't a single person project. It's a lot of people thinking about what do you do when the world goes crazy. And I should say, as my sort of monologue and opening today, I've taken some time off to read and watch what's happening in other places. I tried to get caught up with a lot of other alternative media, and the amount of it who is offering just terrible takes. I don't know why I'm surprised by this, but it's the reflexive patriotism thing, that the crippling nostalgia thing, I think, where the same people who understood peacekeepers were a euphemism for soldiers of fortune, and oftentimes are now pretending to do faux outrage, and I don't think that's realistic. I just don't think the take is useful, and that they get caught up in the idea too much, our side good, that side bad, to offer any useful analysis. As a Pinelander, to be honest with you, my loyalty to existing nations is God. My loyalty is to Christ. My loyalty is to my fellow Christians and Pinelanders, and my loyalty is to my family. So, what I offer you in terms of analysis isn't colored by the fact that there are sides here that have difficult things. There are things to like on each side. There are things to dislike on each side. On the balance, I think more than other channels, we're a little bit more Russophilic than other things, but that's because we understand the problem of, if the existing Western superstructure is allowed to continue, just look how they treated the Canadians. Just a simple example. They will use us, abuse us, spit us out, and say, "Here, have another, you bigot." That's how they look at it. So, it's a problem. But what I wanted to do today is, the reason I came on here is I wanted to reset what's happening out there in the world and offer you my best analysis of it. So I checked out the military situation overnight. It seems like Russia has really stepped up their bombing of late, specifically the campaigns in Kharkiv, which is in the northeast of the country, and in Mariupol, which is in the southeast, where there's been a lot of fighting. If you've been watching, it's anecdotal, but I believe it. There are a lot of these special operators who went into Ukraine thinking they would fight the Russian under rules of engagement, much like they had fought in Afghanistan and Iraq and throughout various areas in the third world, where you didn't have air contact versus a major power. And Russia's solution has been, to this point, more or less to treat people who go over as volunteers who are not members of the Ukrainian military proper as people without status, and they've just kind of blown them up wherever they can. Apparently, a lot of losses, including some people who were rather trained operators, amongst the military contingent that came from the West. So, nonetheless, Ukraine is offering spirited resistance. Should say that that's the case, and help continues going in from the West. Reports are that we are going to see a visit here in the next day or two from three prime ministers, those being Poland, Czechia, and Slovakia, in support of Ukraine, going to visit Kiev. We'll see what happens. Also, Zelensky is going to be addressing the United States Congress tomorrow morning, I believe, at 9 a.m. Something worth keeping your eye on if anything comes out of that conversation. So that's something to watch. But in aggregate, what looks like the situation is that the Russians are moving methodically. The Western media is portraying it as them being stuck. I don't actually think that's the case. I think the problem is that in eastern Ukraine, what's happening is the Russians have basically built an encirclement around the Ukrainian forces, and there's one corridor keeping it open going west toward Kiev. So we'll see their ability to keep that open going forward, or how hard Russia pushes into it. Because remember, Russia's going to have to live with Ukraine, and the question is, what does that look like? There's been a number of maps coming out talking about the idea of expanding Donetsk and Luhansk. It looks something like this. I'll just show you a quick map. This is from Telegram, but it'll give you a feel for it, what we're looking at. And so you know where the action is. Just put a mind to it here. So if we're looking for Kharkiv is there. I'm learning to read Cyrillic, by the way. So that's Lugansk, Donetsk, Zaporozhye. That's where Mariupol is. That's where a lot of the fighting. But there's been a lot of talk about building out a separate state from Ukraine, maybe two different states. Here you see that's Poltava there being kept out. That should be Kiev is there. There's Lviv and all that, and where these lines are going to be drawn. So I'm not saying it's necessarily going to be exactly where this is, by the way, but I'm just showing you this is one of the things that's being talked about. And the negotiations between the Russians and the Ukrainians don't really seem to be going anywhere, in my opinion. I mean, they do talk about humanitarian concerns, but at this point, Russia's kind of all in, and we'll see what happens. So let's talk about different things between countries. There was a number of tweets going out last night suggesting that what the U.S. might try next, in their next wave of sanctions, is the equivalent of, and I want to make sure I'm saying this right because I'm not sure I 100% understand it because it was ambiguous, but that they were contemplating the idea of basically doing the equivalent of an embargo on Russian merchant shipping, which was the phrase they used was to deny access to international water to Russian shipping. So I don't understand how that isn't a provocative act of war. I mean, I know that the logic behind this is probably the same as was behind the Cuban Missile Crisis, where John F. Kennedy ordered a naval blockade around Cuba. I don't know how you're going to do that with Russia. Russia has a navy. Russia has hypersonic missiles, and I don't think using the U.S. and U.K. navies, because they'd probably be a party to it, to try to stop shipping in and out of Moscow as a means to force sanctions on third parties is going to prove particularly wise. But it is an idea we hear, and we do hear efforts, overwhelmingly for America to get drawn into the war. A lot of people on the internet are speculating. One thing they expect is with all these rumors about these biolaboratories. And I will point something out. Anonymous official of all people, they've done 3 videos on this that are actually quite interesting about, the potential of what's happening in these laboratories. Something worth taking a look at in your time, what may be being produced there. And they allege that, the Russians allege that they were looking at genetic level weapons. For aiming for Slavs in particular. So I don't know if that's true or not. It's, fog of war, so propaganda being what it is. But I do know that the West has been maneuvered very heavily into empathy for Ukraine. And this is one of the things you need to know, too. Channels that are offering views that are supportive of Russia or even neutral are being shut down. The internet is being bifurcated quite deliberately. The day will come sooner rather than later, just like what happened with COVID, where you are not allowed to say things that go against the line of what is expected. You can literally support full-on, you can basically support Hitler as long as it's in a pro-Ukraine context, but you can't go out there and say, hey, wait a minute. The people in Donetsk and Luhansk have a story too. They've censored, was it Oliver Stone's did a documentary called Ukraine on Fire that they're censoring ruthlessly. And this is what we see. We are seeing the bifurcation, and this is probably part of the story. The Iron Curtain, as Churchill deemed it, was an incredibly effective way to allow 2 different police states to emerge, one in Russia, one in America and the West. And we are seeing that again in the bifurcation of the internet. That really, the China probably engineered the model, but the thing about it is you won't be allowed to see what the other side's seeing. And of course, side A is saying side B is bad, and side B is saying side A is bad. But we can't see what's actually happening from all sides because our governments don't want us to know. Your governments want you dumb, ignorant, and supportive, and, supporting the next big thing. So it's something we see being pushed very quickly in the West. And frankly, to my dismay, I've seen it on Telegram where so many Russian channels have been shut down. I've sent multiple requests to them. Now I want to know who's ordered these shutdowns because they say on Telegram it's because of local laws, and I don't know what that means. So I want someone to explain to me what local laws being abridged, because as far as I'm aware, there aren't censorship laws on the books in the United States of America. Now I know the Europeans have those, and that's regrettable. But as usual, what we see is social media, the giants doing what they're going to do. And a lot of people think that that is why we're going to see in the near future, the cyber attacks and the internet shutdown thing. So that's what's happening in Russia right now. And of course, the problems that come from it is the food supply of Europe and of countries that depend on this, which are many countries in the Middle East, the Near East, are going to be heavily impacted. If this war ended today, they would struggle to have planting season. Fertilizer comes out of Russia anyway from natural gas. So I would expect the yields coming out of Ukraine and Russia to be much reduced this year. You see a lot of countries setting up export controls. And even off a personal thing, what I've seen in I'll just tell you, up in a small town in northern Maine, is shortages in goods that rely on flour as their basis. Now, it's dangerous to extrapolate too much, but on the other hand, it's good to be observant. So I'll tell you, I go to a supermarket that's missing pasta and a dollar store that's missing cookies, okay? And I just noticed this because I walked through the aisles and I look what's missing. And they said, oh, truck, snows, Canadian trucker convoy. And there were reasons that were given, because I always ask the people who stock the shelves, oh, you're not getting things, what happens? Because I always pretend like I'm just a normie. Say, oh, I want to get my pasta. But I ask the questions, and their answers don't fit the reality. For instance, where I live, even though it would be much quicker to get our goods from Canada because of the stupidity of logistics and customs control, we don't, excepting a few things. So, that being the case, I think we're starting to see the impacted price included of flour shortages, anticipating wheat shortages. Okay, so we're going to talk about a couple different countries. We're going to talk about Israel and Iran. We're going to talk about India, and we're going to talk about China. And this is highly speculative, so I'm just offering you a view of the chatter and what I'm watching for, rather than offering a clear answer about what I expect next. I don't know. Last thing before we leave Europe is there's supposed to be an extraordinary, which just means a non-normal meeting of the NATO ministers happening tomorrow at the same time. So I don't know what they're discussing. I do know that we are seeing movement toward integrating between the Swedish and the Finnish a little bit more, even though they have not joined formally yet. I would also add that one other thing we are seeing is that they are doing, it was a scheduled exercise, so I don't want to read too much into it, but they're practicing naval amphibious landings off the coast of Norway, which would be relevant if there was going to be an Arctic campaign into, they're probably up in near Narvik or something. It's Operation Cold Resilience, or give me a second, it bothers me when I can't remember the names. I've been watching all this crap, so let me see. Norway Operation Cold. Let's see what comes up here. Cold response. Okay, there you go. So now I got the word for it. Okay, so it's not getting the press here in America, but Twitter was a buzz, and it's making a big deal in the Middle East. That Israel claims they had the biggest cyber attack they've had in many, many years upon them. And to understand why that might be relevant, I'm going to go backwards and offer some informed speculation about what might be happening there. I think it may be non coincidental that earlier that same day, before that cyber attack happened, that we see that Israel agreed that they were going to join the Western sanctions regime against Russia. And there is quite a bit of Russian money, as there are Jews of Russian extraction who have it there, where there is going to be certain sanctions imposed upon them. Now, I don't know if they're as vigorous as the sanctions in the rest of the West, but obviously Russia's not happy about this. And I say this amongst the backdrop that in Syria, where Israel has had a free hand and America didn't dare say anything, the Syrian Air Force has been assisted recently, and by recently I mean in the last couple years, but especially the last few months, with getting access to Russian air defense, and which has made the Israelis quite unhappy because it's given the Iranians a free hand to operate there. And so, if we go back a couple days before that, some of you will have remembered that there was a bombing of a U.S. consulate in Erbil in Iraq, which is in northern Iraq, northeastern Iraq, and that the Iranians, shot a missile at it. And one of the things, that for a while the story was the Iranians were, oh, we accidentally, didn't mean that. Sorry. Same thing happened with the Indians in Pakistan. It's interesting who's practicing to attack whom, but More interesting is, although no Americans were hurt in the consulate, there was a rumor floating around that there may have been a Mossad cell operating there. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do know that there has been an escalation that's ongoing between Iran and Israel. I know the news is suggesting that the people behind this hack is a group they call Black Shadow, which is supposed to be this great Iranian hacking group. Who knows? But Israel did say it would take a state level actor, and it could be the GRU. That's the Russians unit. That's like their NSA, if I understand it right. So they may be in there because we saw even today the Iranian foreign minister was meeting with Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. And at the same time we see that, we see consultations happening between Saudi Arabia and Beijing, as well as Saudi Arabia and Moscow, as they're looking to diversify their defense structure. It seems like a lot of these countries in the Middle East are abandoning the United States. And the United States, as we know, has put a lot of money into defending them. Why this is happening is it part of the greater global reset. By the way, there's some interesting stuff out there just floating around. You got to look for it. But when it comes to the World Economic Forum, suggesting that old Klaus Schwab was suggested this by Henry Kissinger, so that if you go back far enough, the CIA may have their hands in this as well, which means it goes back to the bankers and the usual stuff we talk about. Just to be mindful. And I even saw something today. I don't want to put too much into it, but was it one of the Rothschild scions was saying that they can't lose Ukraine and have their new world order. So whatever that means, whatever operations are running from there. Don't know if it's true or not, just an interesting blip of data. Keep that in the back of your mind. What I do expect is there's always the possibility at any given point in time, the Middle East, the Iran-Israeli conflict can work out in a way where it gets hot fast. And if it does, it may draw other sides in besides pretending who supports who. And you would expect Russia to support Iran, and Israel is now, even though it's been flirting with everyone else, and not that you necessarily would trust them, but more drawn onto the American side just by virtue of the fact that they've been rejected, because it may be the case that people in Russia, between Moscow and Beijing, may have made the conclusion that many American dissidents made, that Israel's disproportionate influence on America being such as it is, that they're already part of that side and that they've been heavily involved. And in fact, you could do more damage to America by attacking Israel in some ways in terms of who commands and controls who. Things to think about. Okay. At the same time, you see other people, and this is the problem in the alt media, and I just have to take one moment to talk about this before we go to India. Bad theology causes a lot of problems. Dispensationalism versus covenant theology, which dispensationalism basically says this. I'm going to really oversimplify a long, complicated theological war that has actual political implications. And because it goes back to the whole sort of Wolfowitz, George W. Bush neocon thing, which is the idea that there's separate salvation for Jews than Christians because the different promises in the Bible play out different ways. And so these people tried to cause wars to happen in certain ways so that they could realize the end of time because they believed in a pre-rapture apocalypse. Sounds crazy, but the world is run by crazy people. And so what they did was they believe in a separate thing. So, like, for instance, like I've watched preachers celebrate while Christians are dying in Ukraine that they're getting Jews out of there and sending them to Israel as if a Jewish life is worth more than a Christian life, which, of course, we don't agree with in this program. Every life is a valuable and a precious thing to the Lord. But the idea that there's a special chosen group out there is an idea that comes out of dispensationalism, and that's why Zio-Christianity happens. This idea that Judaism and Christianity are two different paths to the same salvation, which as a Christian, by the way, negates the role of salvation in Jesus, saying it's not necessary for certain groups of people. So I guess it's not necessary for all sorts of groups of people, which is what's bad theology. But it's part of, we look at the corruption that happens. We look at the corruption of culture and what they teach and cancel culture and Marxist theory. This happened a long time ago in the church. It's called dispensationalism, John Nelson Darby, and goes to the infamous Scofield Bible, where they started changing the meaning of things. Why do I get into this level of theology? Not necessarily the most interesting thing to all of you, is because I want you to understand here that that sort of thinking still permeates the American right. And so when you see people saying that we have to defend Israel over everything, including ourselves, that's because they think that's necessary as a precondition to reach the rapture. And if they actually read their Bibles instead of listening to their preachers, they'd go to read Revelation 2:9 and understand, in fact, the exact opposite's true. But that's fine. My job here isn't to teach theology. We do that on Sundays, and thank you to the many people joining us for Sons of Dust Ministry. The truth is, and I want to say this gently. People say it's a base church, and why? Because it's biblical. It's based to the extent we take the Lord in His words and what He says, and the Lord can be tough sometimes. You cannot have mercy at the price of justice. Holiness cannot be sacrificed for expediency, and that's a belief that I have based upon what the Bible teaches. And I encourage you to take a look at your own Bibles. But now that you have that background, I just want to say that's why you should expect that if anything happens to Israel, as is predictable between Iran and America, will be instantly joined in because of the political influence Israel has in America, as well as the large Jewish lobby, and as well as the Christian right, how they look at this thing. I do not look at this thing that way. I don't think the Bible justifies looking at it that way. But if you don't believe that, you basically end up being sort of a Calvinist and believing in covenant theology, assuming you're a Protestant at all. Which, if you're not, that's fine, but that's how that works. Okay, so let's go east for a little bit. India has been in a weird position. India and China don't get along great because they deal over something called the line of control in Ladakh, competing roles in who's going to have more say in the financial systems of the future. China has a good relationship with Pakistan, which sets them against India, but India's been stuck because on the one hand, they've been part of the encirclement of China through the Quad, that's the U.S., Australia, Japan, and India. And then on the other hand, they have a very good relationship with Russia. They've had a number of their military units come through there. There's been a question about whether the West would sanction them or for gaining access to the S-400 defense missile system that the Russians sell. The Russians' top end one's the S-500. I think they only keep it for themselves. Maybe Belarus has it, given the fact that they're basically a vassal at this point. But what has been interesting is Russia put a deal on the table before the Indians, saying that they would trade them oil and gasoline at discount prices and a ruble for rupee swap. Those are their relevant currencies. And the West, the question was if the West would sanction them. And apparently New Delhi's going to do it. They're going to cut the deal. And the bigger deal of it than the fact that they're getting the gas, which it would only be about 3% of their needs. But Russia has a lot of gas it needs to sell, obviously. And Europe is still buying, interestingly enough. I mean, even more than they were before. That's one of the complicated things. America has cut that out as we watch our gas prices roll on unto infinity, and we watch literally our president grovel to Maduro in Venezuela and to the Iranians rather than open the pipes here, which really says everything you need to know about that. But the problem is the trade happening in rupees and rubles is just one more example of how the de-dollarization of the international energy economy is proceeding. And I think it's going to prove to be part of the Great Reset, whether deliberate or not deliberate. It doesn't really matter. Once people find the expediency, as the Russians and Chinese are, of trading in ruble to yuan or rupees to yuan, you're talking at a point now where you're talking about literally we're closing in on half the population of the world. You know, you're talking about Russia and China, or excuse me, between Russia, China, and India alone, you're up over what, about 2.5 billion people in some of the most heavily populated areas. And you know the people who are in their near periphery are going to be doing that, as well as you get into Iran, you get into Saudi Arabia, some of these other countries. Turkey's been double dealing, as is typical. Some people think that's going to come up with the NATO thing. On the other hand, Turkey's been sending more drones, have been doing more damage to Russia and NATO. Turkey's in a weird spot. I don't even know what to say about Turkey. We're going to have to figure that one out over time. But the fact that they're looking the other way, and what is happening is the effort to neutralize India as a potential pivot. So the question becomes, as you look at the larger conflict, will it just be U.S. versus Russia, and that would be basically NATO, and China and India stays out, or do you have a wider war? Because I think China and Russia would draw India in on the American side because of Indian fears about China, and Russia's trying very hard to manage that relationship between China and India. Now, Russia has supposedly been asking for help from the Chinese. If you believe the American sources, they say they need MREs, they need food, they need all sorts of things. If you believe the Chinese and Russian sources, it's been a little bit more state, but there has been a request for weaponry to be sent and manufactured goods to be needed from China to Russia. The West has threatened very heavily to sanction them if they do so. And China, to the best I can tell from what they're saying publicly, seems to still be throwing in with the Russians. Now, we'll see how that all plays out in time. But one of the more interesting things that's happening, and we're going to have to bring in a different piece here, is the Chinese have shut down several areas over supposedly breakout COVID cases. I think they're calling it Deltacron at this point. I don't know how much you want to put into it, but they broke out of that in Shenzhen, which is in southern China, not too far from where Taiwan would be launching, as well as another area. I forget exactly where it was, but what it serves as is it serves as the perfect justification whereby China can shut down its own supply chain heading westward. Now, whether that's just as a means of offering a passive aggressive economic sanction response to what America's doing to try to help their Russian ally, whether that is preparation for an invasion of Taiwan, which we're getting to the time of year where the weather would be good for that, and the tides would be right, whether that is whether it's actually a real outbreak. Let's not dismiss this possibility out of hand. Increasing evidence has come out about the bioweapon engineering of this, and it would not be beyond the pale to imagine the West to try to neutralize certain threats through using indirect warfare. Lord knows China's been doing that with their economics and sort of things, and it's entirely possible. Maybe they are experiencing something worse than what we've seen before. Given that it's China, our first impression usually in the West is to discount what they're saying because they lie. But just because people lie all the time doesn't mean that they might not actually get hit. In fact, it's kind of the perfect scenario for the West if you think about it, because it's the dragon who cried wolf, right? Where if they are getting hit by a bioweapon and they are having massive losses, that in fact it may very well prove the case that they can complain about it and no one will believe them because of how they handled it and how diabolical these schemes are. I think on some level it's useful to realize whatever you think of the sides between the sides, it's clear that there are actors above and beyond this who are trying to engineer this collapse in a way that kills a lot of people, hurts a lot of people, and destroys the world order to make a new one. And I think that it's worth considering the idea that there is probably broad agreement on what the quote new world order should look like, but there's a lot of disagreement about who should be in charge of it. And such as it often happens, it's like families fighting over a will, that a great fortune often ends up leading to great misfortune as different people fight and eventually tear families and all the assets apart in the efforts of trying to take one from the other. So is that a possibility? Yeah, I think it is. And then the other possibility is, I guess, just that they're shutting it down for some internal domestic reason, which maybe they want to watch, maybe they want to gather things. I know China's worried about its agriculture. They were stocking food up like crazy. So we'll see. The Paralympics have now come to an end. If China wants to make another play, a bigger play on the board, the table is now open, and we'll have to watch if that happens. We've seen in the East, South Korea got themselves a new president. So we are seeing the militarization of a number of different countries. Japan is remilitarizing rather quickly, I think, in response to that. And we have seen the movement of a lot of American troops moving all around the world, as well as different NATO allies, which are rearming. But basically speaking, if you want to look at it this way, if we start out with the idea, let's say that Russia gets into a war with NATO, because right now, Russia's position, or I should put it this way, they had the NATO general staff saying that if one toenail of a NATO member gets hurt, it will mean war. NATO is sending convoys into Ukraine to arm them. If the Russians bomb one of these convoys as it enters into Ukraine, will that constitute something that sets off Article 5? Could an attack happen where some of these people are like these heads of state visiting? Would we maybe see, that would be enough? So if it happens, let's pretend it happens, where for some reason, and it doesn't really matter who sets off who, but that Russia's attack on Ukraine damages enough NATO people where NATO join in. What you would expect that war to look like is NATO, Australia, and Japan at the start. Maybe Israel, but probably not. As well as maybe Sweden and Finland, depending on the details. Maybe not. It's important because of where people line up against Russia and Belarus, and whether or not they would help from Kazakhstan or these other countries. I mean, in theory, they would have that possibility. I don't know if that would happen. If that happens, one of the things the Russians are doing quite aggressively is they're recruiting their own foreign legion of fighters who are coming from Syria, who are coming from Libya, who are coming from Iran. So those countries may join into this, and I would expect that a war that happened between Russia and NATO would probably draw in the Middle East, where you would have Syria, Iran, in on one side, you have Turkey, Israel on the other, and Saudi Arabia is a hard read. I mean, Iran has been backing those rebels in Yemen. It's been causing a lot of problems. Saudi Arabia would love to go in there. Will they be able to do it? I don't know. India probably will remain neutral unless China gets in. Russia would want China in. If China gets in, North Korea gets in, South Korea, who knows what they're going to try to do. They're in a really bad spot geographically. And then you have Chinese war against Taiwan, and then you would think India is more likely to join in, and that's what the map looks like. Around the third world countries, people would have nominal support. You might see someone like a Venezuela or Cuba, but they'll probably hang on the outside rather than being directly attacked in the Western Hemisphere. Although you might see, in that case, a war like that, it would make some sense if America did preemptive invasions of Cuba and Venezuela to secure their near periphery and to make countries like Brazil and Argentina that are thinking differently, maybe, pull back in terms of their thinking. So that's how it could play out. We'll see. Let's see here. I'm saying good morning to everybody. Good morning, Brian. Good morning, David. Good morning, Free Green. Good morning, Christy. Would they let you throw your hat? They might let you go for it. Eki, good to see you, brother. You must be up late. On the plus side, they aren't getting as much cooperation from the public as they seem to get. Yeah, I agree with that. Israel and America drop bombs every day. If they entered Ukraine, it'd be just another place they drop bombs daily. Well, yes and no. Yes, in the hypocrisy of what we do. No, in terms of the fact there would be response. The Russians, if this happens, I do expect the destruction of the American Navy will be one of the first things. And I think that's why America's rushing so many troops forward to pre-place them into NATO positions. We'll see. I mean, I don't know where it plays out from here. I have a hard time seeing off-ramps. I will say this. I think it likely that, assuming the Ukraine war stays limited to Ukraine, that the cost of it is going to end up being greater than just Donetsk and Luhansk. I expect Russia is going to want that land bridge to Crimea to be a part of this, going through, I guess it's called Melitopol. And I expect that they will take Kharkiv. I showed you that map earlier where basically it's the Novorossiya map. Odessa may or may not be part of that. That would be more contentious because of the fact that Ukraine wouldn't have a port on the Black Sea. Which would be fine for the Russians, and it's a question of what they're willing to contemplate. It would also allow them to connect up with the separatists they have in Moldova, and Moldova has been seeking to join the European Union. So we'll see what happens. I don't really know what the next play is going to be in that story, but I do think these are the things you need to keep an eye on, and I think the next big thing may be the cyber attack thing. It may be the takedown of the internet. The internet between the different places are already being split up in a lot of different ways here. Let's see. So we have here, and I'm just reading this from something in our own chat over at Pinelanders, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. NATO has sent 35,000 troops, 50 ships, including a nuclear attack submarine, and 200 craft to Norway, which borders Russia for military drills. That's that cold response we were talking about just a second ago. And as of right now, we're just seeing different things here. The ongoing larger effort, of course, is with the monetary system, that the dollar continues to lose applicability as we see more and more countries move away from it. But interestingly, and I think this is kind of telling, the Swiss have been in pretty heavily and the Israelis have been pretty heavy to the sanctioning system. So this isn't just politics being staged managed. The bankers are tipping their hand a little bit. Those are their two favorite places to hang out. So it makes me more likely to believe that they are worried about what Russia represents to this and how that fits into it, the people who are used to controlling our financial world system. All right, so let me think what else is going on that I think deserves coverage. We are seeing domestically here in the United States, supposedly that convoy's still out there running around in circles. I haven't heard anything much else about it. I am in certain chats. If something big comes up, hey, let me know if there's something that needs to be known about that. What else am I knowing? That energy prices continue to rise, shortages will accelerate, and if China really keeps it locked down about 2 to 3 weeks from now, there'll be a lot of different problems. One thing that we should talk about that I really can't cover here as well as I'd like, but we're putting more and more news out there, is behind the scenes, the efforts that began with COVID for passports, for biometric identity, for those sort of things, for access to digital information, are advancing rather quickly. they're kind of behind the scenes, so they're looking at it, but they're getting ready to launch that for whatever the next big thing is, however they will put it together. So we'll see what that ends up meaning. Good to see you, Kev. Yeah, if you have any big updates on the convoy, I would welcome them. Because I'm not hearing anything, but admittedly, I'm watching the foreign affairs thing. I'm teaching myself Russian. I can read Cyrillic now enough to transliterate the names for you on a Russian map, and I'm going to try to learn it because I think that's what we need to know going forward. I think that is something that's important. Now, we do see in the short term, countries are dropping travel restrictions in the West, and the level of enforcement has gone down, and yet we still see the underlying technologies being advanced as a means to control things through the credit score, and maybe the suggestion is through some sort of a bank collapse. There was a thread on 4chan last night that a lot of people were looking at by a guy with a Swiss flag. And of course, we're talking about rumors of rumors, but it's not a crazy rumor in terms of a hypothetical, so let's consider it. That what would maybe be happening in the not too distant future is that the cyber attack would take down the internet essentially. The power would be out briefly, which a lot of people are concerned about, but would come back up. But what would happen is when the internet relaunched, you'd basically be in your own little cul-de-sac. And this is one of the things that I think we should be concerned about, given the censorship that's happening both within the West and the East and between the two, is that we may see the future be a smarter internet where what you see is basically designed to feed you news that moves you based on an AI algorithm script toward whatever the desired outcome is, while separating your ability to organically connect to different people who may share that opinion. I'll just give you a simple example for anyone who's still on Facebook, right? And a lot of us are because we know older people or we have people, whatever, for networking purposes, which is the intent of it. What will happen is if you post certain things, you'll notice it'll get a lot of attraction. And even if your list, like me, I have 5,000 friends, right? Even if my list, I went through and I posted something I knew that 100% or 90% of the people would agree with, it gets no traction because it's being algorithmically flagged. What we are seeing is the advancement of information warfare in real time to put forward. What we see is sort of the facile and obviously false propaganda of the West is now being hyper individualized, where because people aren't talking and connecting to one another as much, although we've been doing that and we've been using Telegram to do that, the narrative actually sticks even if it's false with a large number of people. It's something that you're going to have to be mindful of, and it's going to become stronger. Let's see. Well, I mean, I don't know. The Soviet Union, people say that Russia is like the old Soviet Union, right? I don't see it. I see us as way more communist. We're the atheists. We're the godless ones. We're the ones going around waving rainbow flags. But Russia isn't all that either. As much as I want to believe in an Orthodox restoration and that there's a real trend towards that in Russia, the truth is they are a multi-ethnic, multiracial empire that, has literally gone and shut things down because it would offend Muhammad. So I think we have to be very clear about the limitations of what's out there, but in the aggregate, between bad piety and godlessness, I don't know what a Christian's supposed to choose. I guess that's why we choose Pineland, right? Because I don't think any of these things work very well. All right, so let's see. Kev writes, for the first time they went through D.C., they took 395 and 295, major disruptions because cops blocked exits so nobody could get off. I wonder, are people even in Washington? I mean, who's running the show these days? No one really seems to know that. Lord knows when they sent Harris out there, she seems utterly clueless, and Biden's pretty bad, too. The men on CBs were killing Biden in the swamp. It was good propaganda, horns honking, great overhead pictures of the logjam. It's interesting you say that. I believe you about everything you're telling me, but the thing about it that's interesting to me is that we don't get to see it. We're not going to get to see it because they're pushing for a closed system, and what the next piece in this is, we don't know. But hey, Caesar said, beware the Ides of March, and it is the Ides of March today. It's March 15th, and we are fighting a battle, I think all of us, against a system that doesn't want to allow us to exist as independent of it. So when you see the poverty, when you see the famine coming, when you see the war being enacted between countries, regardless of whether they have control of it or not, they will use these as an effort to disempower people. And this is one of the things we need to wander away from. We need to begin drawing out of it. And I would reiterate I agree with what you just said, Christy. We are 100% communist now. we need to work on drawing out of it, and I would encourage you in the strongest terms as we come out of winter. And if you're in a place you don't want to be, one of the things I hear over and over again in the future is travel is going to be much more difficult. So if you live in a place you don't like, if you can marshal up the resources, and even if you have to land hard, I'm actually going to encourage you to do so. I think that that's a good strategy. And then after you do that, once you get to a place you think you want to be and you've made your bet, begin preparing for planting season. It's March 15th in southern climates. You're going to be there already. Even in northern climates, people will begin preparing seeds into March and April. And people who buy seeds, if you buy them from different farm retailers, this is the time of year they're going to be doing it. So you'll want to look at that. Even if you buy yourself just a couple apple trees or whatever, if you have a little bit of land. I think those are very good ideas at this point. So that's what I'm seeing out there. I will continue to keep a look on things. Talk about personal projects for just a minute here. Want to continue. We're going to keep doing Sons of Dust Ministry, building that up. I have been working with the ability of doing live interviews on here. If my health improves, as it improves, God willing, pray for that. We'll be able to do some interviews with some other people who are members of the community. I actually most of the way done with my Financial Vipers of Venice book. Really fascinating to see the Babylonian mysticism and magic that's being played at the heart of banking throughout history. Probably a good schizo stream in that at some point in the evening. We'll do that if my health permits. Beyond that, I keep working on learning Russian, and within all that, at some point, I'm going to try to put a book out here for you guys. I have a couple different ideas, and I've written things, and it's just the events are moving so fast, and I feel like before the end of the month, I was going to say, let's see. We butcher the best beef ever. You ever sunk a tooth into any way to send you some steaks? Yeah, there's absolutely a way to send me some steaks. I mean, put it. You'd need to put it in. You'd have to put in, what would you do? You'd probably put dry ice inside a styrofoam cooler. I think that's how Omaha Steaks used to do it or whatever. Maybe not that. There's another way to do it. It's not dry ice because that's hazardous. And load it up. P.O. Box 343, Eagle Lake 04739. We'll take steaks. I love a good steak. I am no vegetarian. But what was I going to say? So I was saying when working on the Russians so I can understand what they're saying. But my thought is before the end of this month, we're going to see something big break stateside. I suspect it will be in the cyber energy shutdown thing. But miscalculations could happen. And if they do, neither Russia nor America are in positions to back down. If it does happen that way, bet on Russia destroying the American Navy rather quickly, unless America has a much better laser system or hypersonic missiles than we've been led to believe. I don't think we would see an immediate strategic nuclear strike. I would think maybe tactical nuclear weapons could evolve over the fullness of time. But I don't know. I mean, there's a thought, and I've been reading a lot of the big head think tanks, that what America wants to do is it wants to take Russia out first. And that's why they're provoking this war so they can encircle China. China probably knows that. China's professionally paranoid. They would think that. Whether they can do it or not, I mean, messing with the bear, man. The history of the West. The Russians have a saying about this. Every 100 years, the West gets stupid, invades Russia, and Russia beats the crap out of them. Happened to Napoleon. Happened to Hitler. Could happen to the West again. We'll see. I don't know what's going to happen there because the Russians aren't Europeans, they're Eurasians. They think differently. If the world isn't going to have them in it, like they said, they have no reason not to expand and accelerate to something that could be truly cataclysmic. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that. I don't know how it's going to play. Yeah, please, and you know what? I don't know if you're on Telegram, Rev. If you have some of those links, please send them to me there. I'm better at getting them. And if you want to send them to me through email, by the way, for those of you who don't have my email, newalbion@protonmail.com. Like I said, you'll have to forgive me if I'm talking a little less. I probably won't be talking much the rest of the day because I just don't feel very well. But I am trying to put together a good show with offering you relevant content. So I'm not expecting anything too dramatic to happen today, but as always, we'll keep an eye on things and watch what is happening out there in real time as the world is moving forward. Just take a real quick look here. about yeah, I don't see anything real super interesting right now, so we'll keep an eye on it. Do look for more shutdowns in this economic warfare, and look for Russia to continue on the ground working their advance. Kharkiv and Mariupol will be their targets as they slowly kind of work themselves around Ukraine, excuse me, around Kiev. And we'll see what happens. I think they would like to see the surrender of the Ukrainian government without having to go into the urban areas where the losses will be greater. Rumors are that they've lost 6 to 8,000 people. I don't know if those numbers are accurate or not. I've seen that reported several places. The Russians will obviously claim less, but there's a lot of loss of life. And in the end, I would just say, let's pray for the well-being of our Christian brothers and sisters everywhere and for peace to come forward. I think that's what we should be doing. Heavenly Father, we just pray for those of us who are victims in this war, and that we stand against all the evils that are out there, and that you protect those who need it, who can't protect themselves. In Jesus' mighty name, amen. All right, God bless all of you. Thank you for sharing a little bit of information with me today. I hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you very much to those who support the program. We definitely need you, and we welcome that. If you want to continue the conversation, we'll be over there in the Telegram group, t.me/Atlantic Homeland. And if that bothers you and you want to continue the conversation with just me, you can find me in there and send me a message. I usually will respond. I know some people don't fit well in a group setting. That's fine, not a big deal. If you could accept it, sometimes it takes me a couple minutes. I'm usually pretty good. I read everything, I comment on what I can, and I offer feedback. So thank you for supporting this program. Please like, please subscribe, please share the channel. The thing is, the algorithm screws me. So if you find people you think will find value to this, please share it widely, and let them know one by one. It's not enough to just put a post somewhere. We need more people, and we need more Pinelanders, because Western civilization is on a bad path. Inflation, if you corrected it, they said it was like 7.9%, but if you used the formula they used back before the 1980s, it would be 15%, and it isn't going to slow down. Do keep an eye out for things that use flour. That's going to be short, so if that's important to you and in your living and your products, make sure you get extra now before the price hikes are really factored in. All right, God bless, have a good day, and keep safe. Pinelander out.